Hello and welcome to this training video on navigating the CDFI Fund's fiscal year 2019 financial assistance application in AMIS. My name is Andrew Schlack and I'm an Associate Program Manager on the CDFI and Native Initiatives Program team here at the CDFI Fund. I'd like to thank everyone for your interest in the fiscal year 2019 financial assistance program for CDFIs. Over the next 90 minutes or so, I'm going to pilot us through a quick fly-through of the new financial assistance application in AMIS. This aerial view of the new AMIS application template will cover key topics, including how to set up and launch the correct application in AMIS, the basic features and functionality of the new application template, as well as some common issues that you may encounter while completing your application, and how to work through these issues so that you can successfully complete and submit your funding application. As a pre-recorded overview of the AMIS application, this demo will not dive into detail on every section of the application, nor give a section-by-section walkthrough. For specific details on every section of the FA application in AMIS, I'd like to refer everyone to the FA application guidance documents and the very detailed AMIS training manual, which are all available on the CDFI Fund's website. As an aid, let's navigate over there now really quickly. So from the CDFI Fund's homepage, cdfifund.gov, I'm going to navigate to Programs and Training, Programs, and down the list, the CDFI program and the Native Initiatives program. And today we're covering specifically the financial assistance application. So let me navigate to the CDFI program landing page, and down at the bottom of this is our 5-step process on how to apply. Underneath step 2, you'll end up at sort of home base for all of the application materials for the current funding round, which is fiscal year 2019. Again, we've set this up to allow you to see the key deadlines, a timeline of deadlines coming up for the application. You can see too that we've provided links to all of the various Q&A webinars, getting started, the TA technical assistance and financial assistance workshop, as well as some upcoming webinars, so things that have not happened yet. We provide the call-in information, but if you want to watch past recordings, it'll just say access recording. Here in the middle of the page, you'll see the AMIS application tutorials. You can see that we've already recorded the technical assistance tutorial, and this is the one that we're currently recording right now for financial assistance. But what I wanted to point out here are the resources that we're going to be going over today for the financial assistance application. So key resource, and I'm just going to open these up for future reference if we need to draw on those, is the NOFA. So the first link there, this document is the FA application guidance. This really is the go-to source for answering questions about what is required to apply for the financial assistance program. And then also going to open up this number 12, the AMIS training manual for CDFI and NACA program applicants for the FA. And these three resources are really what we're going to cover today, with the biggest emphasis on this AMIS training manual. So if you want to follow along, maybe you want to download this document or bookmark it. It's a rather long document. It's over 186 pages. So use caution, when printing, but certainly a document, these 3 documents are key along with all the other materials that are listed here. But these are the 3 we're going to be using today as we go through this demo. So if you want to follow along using the training manual, what I'm going to do first is bring us over to AMIS test account. So I'm going to log in here as a test user, and so my test organization is organization 8, and I'm going to pick up here along the training manual to demonstrate some really key steps before I go in and launch my application. And if you want to follow along, it begins on page 27 of the AMIS training manual. But really key to be updating information that shows up on my program profile and my organizational profile to ensure that I'm launching the correct financial assistance application. And so folks have undoubtedly, or if you haven't yet, to read the NOFA to make sure that you understand what program it is you're eligible to apply for, and then making sure that that information is matching what your program profile and your organizational profile indicate within AMIS, the Awards Management Information System. So before I get to launch a new application, I'm going to go through that process just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and some really important things to update on this page as I navigate to my organizational profile page. Some important fields to note is my financial institution type, total asset size, fiscal year end date and month, so I'm a 12/31, and my activities start date. And down below here, if I scroll down, I get to my program profile page, and I want to be sure I'm looking at the CDFI and NACA program profile. So again, on page 27 of the AMIS training manual, it walks me through the 3 key things to update that I need to update before I can launch an application. Include the program, so my program here, my audit and final call report information, and my primary geographic area. I can see that those are required. And if I mouse over, I sort of have this orange, silhouette of a circle with a white question mark embedded. If I scroll over that, wherever there's that icon, I can get additional information. But I want to pause here because this is super critical. Hope that folks take note of this one. So if I'm a 930, this is a required field. So I need to answer this question of whether or not I have my audit or final call report completed for 9/30/2018. And what this does is it essentially ensures that the correct current year is going to populate within my application. If I'm not a 930, I don't have to worry about this. It's not a requirement. I can tell it's not a requirement. There's no red bar there. I don't have to answer that question because I am in an organization that's not a 930. But I just wanted to call that out as I go through and sort of identify common issues that folks are asking about on this particular page. The other thing I wanted to emphasize here, so that there are those 3, again, key fields on the program profile page. So the program, whether or not I'm a native CDFI or a non-native CDFI, determined by the program, and my primary geographic area. Also here is my eligibility category. I can see that I'm designated as a SECA, or a small and emerging CDFI assistant program applicant. If I want to change that, and let's say, I'm, designated as a small and emerging CDFI, but I may want to apply as a core CDFI. That's, my prerogative if I want to do that. I realize that it's a more competitive funding program. I also realize that core, I'd have to provide matching funds commensurate with my funding request per the NOFA. But I am able to request additional capital, so the maximum award size as a small and emerging group is $700,000 this year, and for CDFI under the core program it would be $1 million. And I know from reading the notice of funding availability, if I just go back there, that's this document that I showed folks how to download. I know that I am only eligible to apply as a core organization if my total asset size is over $5 million. So I can see here that I'm $4 million, and if I wanted to, and there have been a couple of service requests that have come in on this particular question, so I'm just going to edit this to illustrate what you need to do, is I need to trigger this to be a core CDFI, so I need to have total assets as a unregulated loan fund of over $5 million. And again, the requirements for my total asset size vary on my financial institution type. So if I'm a bank or a credit union, I need to refer to the NOFA to ensure that I'm adjusting this properly. But I am a loan fund. I know that my total assets have to be over $5 million to be considered a core organization, and I also know my financial activity start date has to be after 1/1/2015. So I'm going to edit this total asset size and save it just to illustrate how this data moves between my organization profile and my program profile page. And so I know I've made that change. I go back to my program profile for CDFI and NACA, and I open that up, and that's a little concerning. I updated my total asset size to trigger me to become eligible under the core program, and I see that this still says SECA, and that's a little frustrating. But if I read the details of how to make this change push through and propagate and change on my program profile record, I know that whenever I change something on my organization profile page, I need to click edit, and I need to see it still says SECA there, and I need to save it. And oh, voila, terrific. Look, it updated now back to what I would have expected, which is a core organization. So that's how I worked through that particular issue. We have gotten a couple of service requests, so I wanted to demonstrate that. Let me go back and change this just for the purposes of illustration. I'm going to go back and change this eligibility category back to a SECA organization. And again, I go back to my organization. I need to edit total assets, so I can edit that. And if I go below $5 million, I will go back to being a small and emerging CDFI. Again, if I go to my program profile page and I click on that link, I'm going to see that I'm still listed as a core. And again, if I just launch the application right now as a core and I click new funding application, I'm going to launch the wrong application. So again, whenever I make changes on the organization profile page, I need to come back to the program profile, click edit, click save, and voila, it updates to SECA. So that's where I want to be. And I want to cover quickly also, designating and applying as a native initiative. So I do need to update my NACA eligibility. And again, this is detailed beginning on page 27 of the AMIS training manual to update my NACA eligibility. And I'll just go through this process very quickly. I would have to answer these questions affirmatively to be eligible under the Native Initiative Program. And again, all of this is detailed in the NOFA. But in order to be eligible under NACA, I would have to answer all of these questions affirmatively and save this record. I've already done that here. You can see my NACA eligibility has been approved. I'm a certified CDFI, and it even says here that I am eligible to apply for NACA FA or NACA TA. And so at this point, I'm ready to launch a new application for financial assistance. So I'm going to click on the new funding application button down here, and it's going to open up the new application record. And so I can see all of the various programs that I'm eligible to apply under. So basically the four base FA, base NACA FA, TA, and NACA TA. And so if I selected any of these, I would be able to launch that application. And let me go back to the program profile. I've already got an application launched, and so I'm going to open this application, but I'm going to pause here to really underscore the importance of the process I just went through, which is updating all of my data that's on my program profile page and as necessary on my organization profile page before I launch the application. And this will save me time longer term as evidenced by, not having to put in service requests to, ask that a different application be launched, et cetera. These are really key steps before I ever click launch a new application. And so we really wanted to take folks through that process and show the key fields that need to be updated. So what I'll do here is I'm going to launch the new application. And so I just launched the new application from my program profile, and I see that I've got a native 2019 NACA FA application launched. And this is my first look inside of the new application template in AMIS. And I'm going to quickly walk through sort of the architecture of this interface to show what essentially we've worked really hard to do is to make this year's application a lot more intuitive and sort of linear as a process. If you think of like online tax preparation software or basically any application that's walking you through a process, that's what we've tried to emulate or actually do in this year's template application. And we're also pulling in a lot of data that exists already from information that's stored within AMIS. So that's why it was so critical that I went through these steps of updating information on my organization profile, because unlike past years where I'd have to enter this information again, it is now all synced to populate and pre-populate data points that are key to completing the application in AMIS. And so we've done a lot of work to make this process much easier, where data is just automatically being brought in for folks, and you're basically affirming that that data is correct. So before we get into particular sections and subsections of the application, let me just walk us really quickly through the basic architecture of the new application template. So when I launch an application, I'm given a unique control number. This control number, I can see it says 19 and it says NA for NACA, and then it's got the application number here. All of that control number is set at the point when I create a new application. That control number stays with me from beginning to end of the application process, and if I'm awarded financing through the competitive funding process, that control number stays with me through my assistance agreement and all the way through my compliance and certification. So that's a really important number. If you ever need to reference it or somebody asks you for the control number, that's a very easy place to locate your control number for the application that you might have questions about, or you might have to put in a service request and you want to reference that control number. This purple tab here is a due date. So as I shared earlier, within our schedule here of important dates, I see that June 6th, 11:59 Eastern is the due date for the application, and so that's this due date up here. I'm given a countdown in this reddish box, so that's the remaining time. I've got plenty of time here with over 3 weeks left to work on my application. And then I've got this helpful little progress bar. I'm going to watch this progress bar is going to show that I'm more and more complete with the application as I go through and start filling in data and completing various sections and subsections until I get to the end and I've got every subsection and section complete. This will say 100%, but I'm going to see incremental progress towards 100% while I'm working towards that goal. So right now I've got some data in the application, so it's showing 2% complete. A couple other helpful links to note up here. I've got a link back to my organization level in AMIS, so that's a quick way to confirm some of this data that's being pulled in directly from the application. I see that I'm logged in as test user org8. When you're logged in under your own credentials, this will have your name and you'll be able to identify how you're logged in. And then we've got also this View PDF button. This is a nice feature. I'm going to urge a little caution around using it, though, however. So this View PDF will basically generate a PDF file for the current state of the application. Now, this is really important, and it will make more sense once I talk about things that are called conditional or dependent subsections. What I'm going to see right now if I view a PDF is it creates a PDF file of the application as it currently is with all active sections and subsections. So this is a good tool to use to sort of see, what's required, and, even, the application financial data inputs. I can see basically every section that's currently active in my application. But what I'm not going to see at this point are sections and subsections that are inactive. And so right now, because I haven't filled in any data around my FA objectives, et cetera, none of that information will be populated in this PDF. So I just want to sort of, pause and offer some caution about using the View PDF option. That you're welcome to use this feature throughout the process, but it's not going to show you the full extent of what's being requested within the application. It's only going to show you the full extent of information that's currently in your application, not necessarily everything that's required. So again, to see everything that's required as part of the application, we have these two documents. Again, the Financial Assistance Application Guidance, and again, this goes section by section throughout the entire FA application, every section and subsection detailed on the page, and you can navigate from the PDF. And then the other document is the AMIS training manual, which will talk about specific items related to completing the application in AMIS that are in addition to this guidance document. So those are the helpful resources, again, to navigate you through the information that's required. But I did want to show folks that there is this helpful View PDF option. But again, it only shows you information that's in the application currently. So by the time this gets to 100% and I would click View PDF, at that point it will have all the data that I'm ready to submit as part of my application. So let me quickly go through some of these below the status bar and below the menu, and I see right away here that this year, because the new functionality within the application template, we've got this really helpful table of contents link. This includes links to, and if you follow along again with the guidance document that we've shown over here, again, section by section. So here I am, applicant level information, organization level information. This is the PDF, that's the FA application guidance. When I go back to the application, I see exactly those sections. So I go to applicant level information, and there I am, organization level information. So this is a really helpful way of navigating between sections of the application. So I can, click on any section and quickly navigate there as I follow along completing this from the application guidance. What I'd like to do is to get into some of the detail around how data is flowing between the application and my organization profile. And this will give me a chance to highlight some of those more nuanced issues that might come up as I'm trying to complete my application. Again, we've tried and worked really hard this year to make all the validations and all the data very transparent and very accessible and very easy to follow. And so by illustrating some issues that might come up on a couple of subsections here, you'll hopefully get a good sense of how to address and mitigate these errors if you encounter them in other sections. So I'm going to start here at the applicant level information on the organization level information. And I just click on that link, and I see right away that under that link, I've got some data fields here. And this is helpful. I've not entered any information into my application yet. and here's some information that appears to be already filled out. And I can tell these are already filled out by, of course, reading the above the line page instructions. So I see that this information was brought in from my organization profile page. And so if I need to change this, it says they're pre-populated. If I need to edit and update, I'll need to update the information directly on my organization page in AMIS before continuing. So here's my test org, and I can tell again that these are pre-filled fields that I can't edit. So if I try and highlight those, and you might not be able to hear, but I'm trying to click and edit those, they're locked down. And they're locked down because they're pulling in the data again from my organization level. And so a couple of things to point out. Wherever there's a red asterisk, these are going to be required fields. And I'm not going to be able to save a subsection without having all of these red asterisk fields completed with valid recognized data. And so let me go ahead. At the bottom of every page, there's going to be a blue save button. At the bottom of every subsection that's collecting information as part of the application, there'll be this blue save button. And if I click on the save button, I'm going to showcase here a couple of things to note. And again, this is universally applicable throughout the application. When I run into a validation issue and I'm unable to save the subsection, I'm going to see right at the top of the page, this is going to be a red text on a sort of a pinkish hued colored box, and it's going to tell me some responses have been saved, but there have been validation errors. And I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to see this bright red text. This response is required, and an attachment is required for this question. So I see on this page that I have 2 errors to address before I can successfully save this subsection. And again, I'm going to show how the data that we've worked really hard on integrating the data that's that's existing in AMIS, how it flows into the application to save me the trouble of, having to enter my DUNS number twice or my EIN in multiple places, or, verify my financial institution type when I've already done it on the organization page. And so I will navigate back to the organization page, and just as a reminder, there's this helpful link up here, because I've read above the line here, this is pre-populated. If I need to edit or update these fields, I need to update it on the organization profile page to continue. And I see that organization structure is missing. So when I navigate to the organization record in AMIS, I can see here's organization structure, and it's empty. It's not populated with any data, but it is required in the application. So I need to edit this, and I forgot to choose my organizational structure information. So let me just show this again right here. Okay, no data was pulled in because on my organization level, it's just not filled out. So as soon as I save this, let's just say I'm a 501c4, I'm going to save that. And I can see, great, it saved it here under my organization. If I go back to the application, it's not going to push automatically. So this field is still blank. If I try and save it, I'm going to get the same error. And what I need to do is I need to refresh this page so that the data that I've updated outside of the application, again, back in AMIS on my organization profile, and I go back to my organization level information, and boom, that's terrific. Look at that. It brought in my nonprofit 501c4 status. It also did something interesting here I want to point out. It gave me a new subsection that is specific to my status as a 501c4, which is my 501c4 questionnaire. Now again, this is just, basically it's called a dependent subsection, and it's dependent because I am a 501c4. I designated myself as a 501c4 on my organization page, and this goes to what I was sharing earlier is, we've worked really hard so that we're only presenting required information for the type of financial institution and organization that I am applying under. And so, groups that are not a 501c4 will never see this questionnaire. It's not required for them, but you'll see here, because I am a 501c4, these responses are required. So I just wanted to show that, again, this is all in a level of effort that we went through to make sure that we're only collecting data that's specific for the financial institution that's appropriate for each applicant. And so 501c4 information isn't collected from all applicants, and so just a heads up on, the guidance materials will talk about every section or subsection. If you don't see a subsection or section within your application, it's not applicable. So another good reference for that is matching funds. So because I'm a native CDFI and because I'm small and emerging, I don't see a matching fund subsection. If I'm a core organization, and I'll go through an example of this as part of this tutorial, I will at the very bottom see a matching fund section. But again, not required for the type of institution I'm currently logged in under, and so I don't have to worry about it. But just a heads up that that's the way that the information is pulling, again, from the organization profile page here. So nonprofit, 501c4, I go back to the application, and it's pulled that in. So let me try and save this again, and that should have fixed one of my validation errors. But, I got this other lingering validation error, and fortunately in bright red text, it's telling me an attachment is required for this section. So let me see what it's trying to collect. It wants an organizational chart. Again, I was told that I'd need an organizational chart as part of reading the application guidance. And unlike in years past where, attachments were collected in a different, maybe a different section of the application, this year, as part of making the whole application process much more intuitive, we are requesting attachments on the pages where attachments make the most sense to collect. So this is, again, organization level information. I'm going to collect my organizational chart on this page, and that's why this attachment requirement is on this page. If I look here, it says drag and drop. It says upload document here. There's a faint gray perforated line that says drag and drop. Important here is that this is a drag and drop. It's very easy to use. I just open up my File Explorer. I've collected all my attachments in advance, and I'm going to drag and drop my attachment. And it's important to, have it land within this gray upload, the perforated line area. If I drag it somewhere else in this window, certain web browsers may try to open the attachment. I might get an error message, or it may open the document that I uploaded and, boot me out of my application, which is a little annoying. So I just really want to make sure that I put the file in the drag and drop area. Why don't I just go ahead and save this? And it's, but before I save it, a best practice, because, every year, unfortunately, we'll get some applications who, just haven't attached the correct file. So why don't I double check my application? Oh my goodness, I have erroneously attached a picture of my kitten. That's my little baby kitten Chewbacca, baby Chewy, and I guess I knew it was baby Chewy because there's Chewy as a ping file. So best practice again is always to check what attachment I've included. So that's the wrong attachment. Every year this unfortunately happens. There's not a lot we can do about it. We can validate that you've included an attachment, but we can't validate what attachment you've included. So that's something as a best practice you always want to check before you submit your application that you have indeed attached the intended file. And so if I save this again, I'm going to notice two things. So my organizational chart is there. And look at this. This is terrific. I have a green header now that says subsection was marked as complete. The other thing I want to point out is I've now got a green check mark adjacent to my organization level information. That means that this subsection has been saved successfully because I removed these two errors that I had initially. One was I hadn't filled out on my organization profile my organizational structure, and then the second error I had gotten was I had not included my organizational chart. So that's a quick look at how to work through some of the validation issues, how the data is flowing in between my organization profile and the AMIS application itself, and then again, a word of caution about ensuring that I have double-checked that the attachments I've provided are the accurate attachments, and if they're not, I can always remove them using this X button, and then again, just dragging and dropping new attachments or the correct attachments over that field. And point out here too that my progress now, this is how this ticker is working, so it's up to 4%. So you can remember before I think it was at 2%. So as I complete subsections of the application, I'm going to notice that that tracker is making progress against my goal of having 100% complete, and I'll need it 100% complete before I can attest and submit my application. So at this point, I can move on. I've gone through sort of how to change that information on my organization level, how to fix some common validation errors, the fact that the red text is always going to guide me in how to address any validation errors. What I'd like to do now is to navigate to the next subsection to illustrate another way in which information that lives in other areas of AMIS. So again, on my organization level, I saw how the organization structure is brought in to the application. I'm going to show now too how contact information is brought into the application based on records that already exist within my AMIS organization profile. So again, this is really an effort to make everyone's lives easier in completing the application. I don't have to fill out new contact information. It's going to pre-populate all that information. And all I have to do is select and identify who I'm selecting from my organization to be connected to this application. So when I navigate to my applicant contact details, I read the intro text here, and I can see that it's suggesting that I identify at least 2 application points of contact, and I can also see that my contacts can be points of contact, or they can be authorized representatives. And again, those are folks that are defined on my organization level contacts as authorized reps or points of contact. And as the instructions say, I can just start, typing in data, and it pre-populates all records that are eligible to be designated as connected to my application. So here I have those 2 records that I saw back in my organization profile. They pre-populate. I have to select them, and great. I can save this. It's pulled in that contact record, and if I want to view that record, I can click on View the Record, and I can make sure that this information is all up to date. I can, I'm an authorized representative. I can change this information, or if I am this point of contact, I can also update my information. Maybe I want to add the phone number, etc. Just confirm my email is correct so that if the CDFI fund has to reach out for any reason, I have verified that that is the correct contact information. So I've added 1. It's the point of contact. I see here it's a suggestion that we have 2, and we really do encourage having at least 2 points of contact, authorized rep or point of contact for the application in case somebody is, out of the office and we need to send out, timely information on the application, or somebody's on extended leave. We're at least going to send the information to at least 2 different email accounts or phone numbers will have two different contacts. So what I need to do is to add another row. So I click on the green plus button here. I'm going to get another row here, and again I can start typing in the name, and I see that the authorized representative is here. I can save this, and I can add as many records as I want. I know that in this particular case, I only have 2 contacts that are identified in my AMIS account. So if I had more, I could keep adding records. But let's also say I need to delete a record. So there's the red subtraction button. If I just click on that, I can remove a row. And again, I can see that it's populated with this contact is different than that contact. That's all great. I can see here I've not saved this yet, so I don't have the green check mark. Really important for everyone to take note of. The data is temporarily saved, but the subsection is not saved. So, if I navigate away from here and I go back, I'm going to get that information, but what's really critical is that before I navigate away, I always want to click Save. If I'm able to save this subsection, beautiful. Because I did identify 2 points of contact, subsection was marked as complete. I've got my nice green check mark here. That's helpful to remind me that I'm complete with this section, and I can move on. But we did want to point out that this is yet again another way that data is being brought in from existing data that's on my organization profile, in this case my contact records, so associated with my application, rather than having to enter the new data again. Why don't I go quickly through another section. Let's go to the environmental review criteria. Again, this is not going to go section by section. Again, you'll have information. I can just, save these. You'll see here, this is pre-populated. Again, I can tell it's pre-populated because I've, identified that it's being brought in from my organization profile. But I also know it's pre-populated because I can't edit it, and because the background of these fields is gray, which is distinct from, another. So I can save this, and the reason I can save this is because I see that item number 4 is empty, but it is not required because it doesn't have a red asterisk. So I am able to save this subsection. I see now my progress has gone up to 6%, and I can continue on, and I'm going to go to environmental review criteria subsection to illustrate another type of question. Again, this is all in an interest of only asking for information as it's required in an effort to really streamline the application process for all applicants. We're not only bringing data in from existing data points within AMIS, we're also only triggering questions or responses that are necessary for a particular applicant or a particular response that would merit, additional follow-up. So here I am on the environmental review criteria subsection, and if I look at this page and I read the above the line instructions, I know that if I answer no to all these questions, I'm going to be able to save, this subsection, and this basically means I'm not doing anything that would trigger an environmental review. And so as discussed in the guidance materials and the NOFA, as part of the application review process, we're doing an environmental review analysis. But let's say, for one of these, I am involved in something that would trigger an environmental review. So I need to answer this question affirmatively. So instead of no, I'm going to answer yes. And I'm going to see 2.3. When I answer yes, it's triggered this new question. It's a dependent question, and it's dependent because I've answered yes. So 2.31 is a new dependent question where I'm asked to provide a detailed description of the relevant activity. So as I answer certain questions in the application, such as those questions that are part of the environmental review criteria. You'll see them also if you're a 501c4 and you answer affirmatively to a 501c4 question. But the other place it's going to show up these types of questions are in the compliance questions. So again, if you answer a question that would trigger or warrant additional context to be provided, that would be helpful for a reviewer reviewing your application, you're going to be asked to provide more information as a result of your response to these questions. And you get a new narrative text justification box. This is a different kind of response box, so it's a narrative text box. So I can see here that it's going to give me, my requirements for responding. So I can see here there's a little countdown on the number of characters. As I, go through this, it's going to count down, and I basically know how to limit my narrative response in length to match the character counts. That is a quick look at sort of, how these types of questions are triggered, again, based on a preceding question. So I'll see it in 2.3. Let me just do it again in 2.4. So critical habitats of endangered or threatened species. If I say yes, I get a new 2.41, and these become required. If I answer no to these, I don't get that justification text box conditional response. And if I just save this, I'll see that I'm going to get a validation error. So where I answered no, I'm okay, but where I get a validation error and where additional information is required, basically because I didn't complete this page, if I just answered no to the rest of these questions, I will be able to save this page, and we can move on to the next example. And I'll just quickly close out my environmental review by clicking no on all the rest of the information, and I will, terrific, get a subsection marked as complete. I've got my nice little green check mark there. And, oh, that was a big section. I see that I'm moving right along now. I've got 16%. So this progress bar can be a little bit misleading because it's only really tracking responses to the number of questions. And right now I've not enabled or done anything to enable a larger part of the application, which is in the FA objectives section. And so it's really counting, active questions, the percent done or percent complete based on currently activated questions. So that's why it jumps so much to 16%. That's a little bit in the weeds. You can disregard that if that's confusing. But I do want to move quickly here to show another feature of the application. And 501c4, again, that's the same type of question. That's really a conditional subsection. I'm only going to see this if I am a 501c4. So again, if you're following along in the application guidance, this document, and you come to a section that's not visible for you, it's not going to be required. So like here's another one, depository institution holding companies. If I'm a credit union, I'm not going to see this subsection. So just skip over it. That's pretty self-explanatory, but just cautioning all applicants will not see every subsection, again, because we've gone through a lot of effort to tailor the application experience for your particular financial institution type, and we're only collecting data that's required of your institution type and your based on the type of application that you're completing. So I'm going to go back to this application, and my associated SF424, again, this is going to look up my record the same way that it did under my applicant contact details. If I don't see my SF424 populated here, again, always read this helpful page intro text, if you will, that's within the application. It says, okay, I'm supposed to submit a service request with that as the title. And that's how I can work through any issues where my SF424 might not be being located correctly. And usually it has something to do with a DUNS number. So we've gotten a couple of service requests on this one too, so I'll quickly illustrate. My DUNS number, and again, if I go back to my organization level information, here it is under item number 4. You can see my DUNS number is populated again from the data that's on my organization profile. So there's my DUNS number here. This DUNS number has to match what it is on my SF424. That's the bridge or the link, if you will, between your SF424 record that was created and validated in the SAM.gov system. That's how it is brought in and connected to your application. And so basically 100% of the time, if you're not finding your SF424 record in this pick list, that's the issue. And so you want to just maybe even before you submit a service request, confirm that the DUNS number on your organization level record matches the DUNS number that's on your SF424 as your official, DUNS number in the grants.gov system. And so let me go to this total time to complete an application. And I just want to use this section to show a little helpful feature, which is this bookmark subsection feature. And so on the top of every page, there'll be a little red bookmark here, bookmark this section. And so this particular subsection is asking me to estimate the total amount of time I've spent, my organization has spent on, preparing and completing this application package. Well, as we know, we just started, just got rolling on finishing out, filling out this application. So it's really impossible for me to even estimate at this point how long this application has taken. And so what I may want to do, rather than just putting in a plug number, is I want to bookmark this section. And so you'll see down here next to the table of contents, this line item, if I bookmark this section, I get this helpful little red bookmark that tells me that I need to come back to this section. If I save this, I'm going to get an error, which is great. It's also going to show up during my validation process. But we want to, show the utility of this bookmark feature for, other areas, let's say in the application financial data. If I go to, financial attachments, maybe I'm having, my CFO or my comptroller provide some of this information and I want to flag it for them. I can put these little bookmarks on basically all subsections that I might want to flag for somebody else's review. So you can see they sort of, populate next to the line item so that it's a quick, visible cue for anyone I might be working on, a colleague who's going to come back, or even for my own benefit, I'm going to come back later, and I want to quickly identify those key sections that, wouldn't have a green check mark, but areas that I might need to focus in on. And the total time to complete an application is a good one because at this point I don't even know what this number is, and so I just really want to flag it to come back to at the end when I'm done with the application. So that little red bookmark is going to stay with that page for as long as I have that enabled. So I'm going to deselect it on these two pages to basically uncheck, to unbookmark, if you will, those key sections, and so I can proceed on. And I will proceed on to a couple of other sections to illustrate a few more key features of the new application template and its functionality. So a couple of areas to pay attention to. So under the financial assistance request details, this is where I put in my award request. There's a process, again, that's described in detail on the within the FA application training manual in AMIS, and also the FA application guidance. So again, these two documents that I had downloaded at the front of this web demo, these two documents will take me through this in more detail. but I do want to show the basic structure of what I do to calculate my award type, or award request rather. Here I'm going to see again that certain fields have a gray background and certain fields have a white field background. The gray background again is data that pre-exists within AMIS, so I can tell that this applicant is not a past FA or TA or PPC award recipient in the past 2 years. And if I want to, double check what these fields are collecting within the application, whenever I see one of these handy little blue question marks, I can mouse over it and I can get more information about what's being drawn in or what's being calculated, what it's asking me to do. I won't be able to update or edit any fields that are in gray. These are automatically calculated for all applicants based on existing award data. The one field that applicants do have to update, this is particularly important for bank holding companies who may be applying for different affiliates and subsidiaries over the past 2 years, that this data does not pull in the affiliated or subsidiary information. So you'll see right there that you will need to enter this data directly. And so I can see here's the $5 million cap calculation. And again, the reason for these limits is explained in detail within the NOFA itself. But I know that there's a $5 million cap on awards in the past 2 years to applicants and affiliates and subsidiaries. So let's just enter some information here, and I'm going to show basically this calculation calculates dynamically. I can see I entered 4 million. So from the $5 million cap, it has subtracted $4 million of eligibility or bandwidth, if you will, in my requested award amount, and it will limit me to only applying for $1 million in this case. If I just keep that at 0, I'm going to have an award cap of 5 million because I basically am saying I've gotten any FA, TA, or PPC awards that would count against my $5 million cap. And here's the helpful red text again telling me that I'm eligible to apply base FA of $1 million. So I've saved that subsection, green check mark. I can go on to the financial assistance request. And here's where I enter my base FA amount. And if I recall correctly, I am logged in as a native initiative. And so I know from reading the NOFA that I'm able to apply, for a maximum award size and a minimum award size. And let me just, for the purposes of illustration, break the rule and get a validation error to highlight how the validation errors are addressed. So let's just say I'm working fast and I just put in 100. I know that because I'm a native CDFI and I'm applying under the FA program, my base FA, the minimum award amount I can request is $150,000. So I'm unable to save this subsection because I've put in an amount that is outside of those limits. Similarly, if I put in like 2 million, I'm going to exceed the maximum award size. I will get another error message that says, oops, the maximum I'm allowed to apply for is $1 million. So again, really, just showcasing we've written these validation errors to, really help coach or guide you along if you enter a response that's not valid. It's going to basically show you in red text what you need to do to correct that response in order to successfully save this subsection. So if I enter $1 million and I click save, I'm going to get a legitimate response, and beautiful. Check that out. This is green up above. My subsection was complete, and I'm moving right along. 17% complete with my application. I see these green check marks, which is helpful to let me know that I'm moving right along. And to those ends, I'll move here to another section that I wanted to cover, which is working with our application financial data table. And so in the very next section, application financial data, I'll navigate there, and I'm going to expand this window. So a couple of things to just note before I start entering financial data, which is in the application financial data. Again, as I shared earlier, what we've done a lot of work around this year is to make sure that I'm only going to see data that I'm required to provide as based on my financial institution type and the type of application I'm completing. And so I know I'm an unregulated financial institution because, I'm a loan fund. If I were a bank or a credit union, it would say that, it would say credit union in here, and I would confirm this would say credit union or bank holding company, and I will save that. And what that's going to do is once I save that, it ensures that I've got the correct application financial data input section pulled up. And so I'm only going to see data fields that are specific now to my institution as an unregulated CDFI. If I were a credit union, these chart of account line items will be different because I'm a credit union. If I was a bank, again, it would be custom to a bank. So basically, all the fields have already been confirmed as required for my financial institution type. Before I get into entering data there, this is specific for unregulated applicants, so loan fund, venture capital funds, and other non-insured depository institutions. What I wanted to show here is, if you remember my example earlier with my kitten, little Chewbacca there, as an attachment that was the wrong attachment. What I want to show here is that just like that, we're not able to verify that you've attached the correct attachment, nor are we able to verify the number of attachments that you've attached. So please pay special attention. Again, unfortunately, this happens every year where we'll get an application that might only include one of these attachments, even though it's asking for 3 historic fiscal years, or we'll get extra attachments. So where it sort of indicates the number of attachments, just to confirm that those are the correct attachments. And I'm just going to show, too, that I can upload multiple attachments at the same time. So I've gone ahead and I've assembled all the required attachments based on the FA guidance document. I know exactly what those attachments are, and this makes my life a lot easier when it's time to upload those. So I can just, again, drag and drop. I want to be sure I drag and drop into the correct area here so that it doesn't try to open the file within the web browser. And so voila, there I go. I've got my 3 historic year audits. Let's say, though, I've only updated or uploaded 2 of them, and let me go finish this process. I've got a management letter. It asked me for the management letter, and it also asked me for my interim financial statements. So I've got my interim financial statements, and so I see that I've attached basically a document where it has asked me for attachments, and I'm just going to go ahead and save this just to illustrate what I want to caution people against, because you can see here I was successfully able to save this subsection, which is okay, which is good news. The bad news is I was not careful, and so I've only provided 2 attachments here, and I can see that I've only provided 2 attachments because I've labeled these very clearly. So what you label your documents, there's no required nomenclature for your file name, but always helpful or best practice to sort of help the reviewer as they're going through your application to clearly label your attachments so that they know what they're opening. And I see here that I'm missing my 2018 audit because it's not listed there. And the caution is I'm able to save this subsection and move on, but if I got to the end of the application and I was 100% complete and I was able to attest and submit the application and it got locked down, I would have never provided my 2018 audit, and that would have been, you know, my oversight as an applicant, because I was not able, you know, I didn't check and I wasn't careful. And so here again, it asked for 3 attachments. I've only provided 2, and even though I was able to save the subsection and submit the application, I've not provided all the required information. And there's nothing, unfortunately, that anyone can do once the application is submitted. So just exercise caution in completing every subsection, especially where it's asking you for attachments, to sort of check and double check that 2 things: that first, you've provided you know, the correct attachments, and then second, that all the attachments that are required have been provided. And an easy way to do that is to clearly label your file names. It makes your life easier for sort of doing a quick, you know, check that you've provided all the requirements, and it also does your reviewer a big favor by letting them know exactly what it is they're going to be looking at when they click on a particular attachment. So that's what I wanted to show about the financial attachments. Again, that's really particular for unregulated institutions, for which I am, and that's why I see that subsection. Again, if I was a bank or a credit union, I'm not even going to see that subsection that I just, you know, talked about for the past, whatever, 3 or 4 minutes. So you can disregard that if you're a bank or a credit union, and we'll go to the application financial data inputs. I should say you shouldn't disregard that information. The point was, in illustrating that, is to just make sure that you know, banks and credit unions also require attachments, just to be sure that you're looking and confirming that you've included the correct attachments. That's, you know, universally applicable. You just won't see the financial attachment subsection if you're a bank or credit union, but you are required to provide attachments throughout the application. So let me go here to the next subsection, which is the application financial data subsection. And this gives me a chance to talk about one of the other improvements in the application template is how we're collecting data. So folks, past applicants will recall last few years we've collected this sort of year by year on a you know, individual record basis, and you were sort of keying in data you know, for each field, following along, and you know, making sure that the correct data field was collecting the correct data points, etc. This year, what we have here on the application financial data is what's called a static table. So this is basically a chart of accounts for all of the data that's going to be required for my application financial data inputs. So that list of requirements, again, is in the FA application guidance, and you know, it's particular to your institution type, so unregulated, credit union, and bank. They're all going to be different. Also to point out here, an improvement really that's made possible by the new template is we're able to pre-populate the year of your the data that you're entering. So we ask for 3 historic years, we ask for the current year, and we ask for the 3 projected years. And what this is based on really is, remember back at the very beginning when I was going through our organization profile, and I, you know, looked at my fiscal year end date, so 12/31, and also on my program profile, and I said that if I was a 9/30, that this audit or final call report number was a mandatory field. Basically, my responses to these questions determine whether or not I have my 2018 audit complete. And if if the answer to that question is yes, my current year would be 2019. If the answer to that question is no, my current year is still 2018 because I don't have historic audited financial statements for 2018, and so that's why it's my current year. And that information is pulled in directly into this field, 2018, as the current time period, and then AMIS automatically, subtracts. So I know exactly what year I'm being asked to provide the data for, but again, it's based on that field and my 3 projected years, all based on my response to whether or not my current year is, at this point, 2018 or 2019. And so, again, that's why it's really important to get all this information correct on my program profile before I get into the application. I've already reconciled all that. This particular matter is correct, and I'm ready to go and fill in my data. What I'd like to do here is to point out another resource that we made available, because we understand that this is a really big data table. It's collecting, 7 periods of time, 3 historic, 1 current, and 3 projected. And then, depending on my financial institution type, it's a lot of different, chart of account values. So what we've done here is we have provided this resource, which is called the Application Financial Data Inputs Workbook. It says for reference only. I'm in the CDFI program. I'll point out that under the Native Initiatives program, it's the same workbook. I'll just navigate there because it's also number 8, so Application Financial Data Workbook. And I want to open this resource to show what we've essentially done is created an Excel workbook that's for offline use. This, again, doesn't get attached anywhere in AMIS. This is just a recognition that it's easier. Maybe your CFO or your controller, somebody in your finance department is going to work to provide all these data points maybe offline, and then if you're the grants manager or something, you're going to be responsible for entering this at a different point. So this is really just a resource. Any yellow colored cell with blue text is going to be one of the required data inputs once I get into AMIS. And I'll just point out there are 3 tabs here, one for unregulated, one for credit union, and one for banks, bank holding companies. And you see that these chart of account line items, so interest expense, total interest expense, vary based on my institution type, and that's why there are 3 different tabs. So if you are using this, please pay attention and reference the financial institution type tab that's appropriate for your organization. You'll see that this is brought in, when you download it, it's blank. So the goal is to have this filled out before you come to the Application Financial Data Inputs tab. So let me go back to the Application Financial Data Inputs tab. And if I look here on these records and I go back to my Application Financial Data, I'm going to pull up a sort of pre-filled out version of that workbook and illustrate a couple of things. So again, when you download this workbook, it's blank. This, I've just filled in some data from test data to illustrate, how to use this workbook. And let me just start by, going back and forth between Excel and my web browser here, where I'm filling in data on the application template. And you can see that this follows, the chart of accounts in the same sequence and the same sort of chronology. So historic year 3, I see this is historic year 3, 2015. And so what I can do is I can work between Excel, and if I highlight a cell and I go Control C, and I can come back in here and I can do Control V, and I can do this you know, for each period, Control-C, Control-V, and do it again for these. And I'll just fill out the top row for the purposes of illustration. So I'm going to go to current, and I'm going to do Control-C and Control-V. And just a little trick in navigating through data tables is if I use the tab key within really any field, form field in a web browser, the tab key, which is right above the caps lock on my keyboard, will move me from left to right as a quick way to sort of get between, you know, data entry point and data entry point. So there's current. I'm going to take my projected, Control-C, Control-V. I'm going to click tab, and I'm going to go over there to projected year 2, Control-C, Control-V, and just grab the projected year 3, and again hit tab and do Control-V. And so if I were to be filling this out completely, and I'm not going to do it obviously in the interest of time, but you know, because there's a lot of data to be filled in, that's the way I'm working in between this resource, which is the offline workbook, filling in all the data points that are required of the application financial data. Again, I'm using extra caution when I fill this workbook out that I'm using the correct tab, so unregulated, credit union, or bank. Obviously, I'm an unregulated financial institution. I'm a loan fund. And so I've grabbed the data from this workbook. I've finished now filling out my application financial data, the top row. And a couple of questions have come in. Basically, the question is, can I partially save my application financial data? And the answer is yes. So you do want to save this early and often. Let's say, you know, I enter data and then I get caught on a phone call, and I'm not going to be able to come back to the application. My application might time out. So I do want to save this. And when I save this, what I want to show is that I'm going to get an error here. And what's taking a little time right now is it's running validations basically on all the fields that have a red asterisk. And it's going to tell me exactly what's wrong. And you can see that I've not really filled in any data, so I've got a lot of validation errors. But particular to what I was doing there in working in between this workbook and the cell itself, which is collecting the data, I was selecting the cell, and I was doing Control-C. And so what it did is it brought over this $sign. And the dollar symbol is not recognized by AMIS as a valid number. And I'll just show this. So if I delete that, and I go back down here and I save, I am no longer going to have a validation error on this particular cell, but I will on the other 6 time periods because I still have the $sign in there. So again, it's running its validations, and beautiful for historic year 3 where I removed this $sign, it now recognizes this as a valid number. But you can see that, you know, wherever I have the $sign still in there, it is going to create an error, which can be kind of annoying if I've gone through and put in all the data. So what I really want to do is, instead of highlighting the cell, I want to really just highlight the value and copy and paste these. So you can see here it's bringing it over without the $sign, and so I want to do that for each of these cells just to avoid that pesky little error. And if I tab through this and I get to each period, I'm going to continue to update these. And as I get, you know, farther and farther towards the projected period 3, and I keep, again, using the tab key as a nice fast way of navigating between these required fields. Get to the last point, there it is, 10 million. And again, I'm double clicking inside of this just to select the numbers instead of what happens in Excel with the formatting instead of the $sign. I'm just, again, bringing over the number. And now when I save it, I'm not going to get any of those errors on the very top line, which I've completed. And the question that has, surfaced is, okay, so I need to, complete this, and if I do need to save this, I've got to go to a meeting or something, or I've got another phone call. Because I've saved this, even though I've got a validation error because I've not completed all of the required data, I have completed the top line, or, maybe I've completed 5 out of the 7 periods or whatever. And now, as long as I, if I navigate away, and I've already saved that subsection, really critical to this is just to be sure to please save that subsection. I don't have the green check mark, but if I come back to that subsection, beautiful, look at that. All of my data that I was able to save on that subsection is stored within the application. So the answer to the question is yes, by all means you can save partially completed subsections at any time. You just really have to remember before navigating, this is really critical, what I'd really want important for everyone to note is to, before you navigate away from the subsection, just to click save. And that way these data points will be stored. I don't have to re-enter that data, and I can log off. I can come back to this in a day or two, and the data that I've already provided will be stored. This is another good place to remind folks of using the bookmark feature. So maybe, I'm providing the historic, somebody else is going to provide the projections. So maybe I just want to do my colleague a favor or do myself a favor and maybe bookmark this section so that I know to come back to it as a key section that's going to need to be updated before I move into the other sections of the application, which include the FA objectives. And so what I'll do right now is not fill out all the data under the application financial data just in the interest of time, but again, to remind folks, you really want to just be collecting the number and not the $sign, and so to do that, just double click and select the number. And again, Control C and Control V is the quickest way. And you can always hit the tab button to move between form fields, right? So there I am clicking tab. What I'll do now is I'm going to go to, let me just go to key personnel. And what I had talked about under the application financial data is us collecting information in what's called a static field or a static table. And the fields that are filled in with a static table are basically, I know all of the data points, both in the X and the Y direction. So for the financial data, I know there are 7 years of data that are required. I know what those years are. I can pre-populate that. And oh, by the way, I also know the rows and the chart of accounts that need to be entered. So I know all of the data that is in the Y direction. And so the easiest way to collect that data is in sort of a locked table where you're just literally you're entering data line by line into the correct X and Y coordinate. So here's I'm entering 2015 data for cash restricted for operations. That this type of data is best collected through this this type of table, which is called a static table. And what distinguishes that from the other type of table that's used in the application, which I'll run through here using the key staff under key personnel, is another table type which is called the dynamic table. And it's dynamic because we don't know how many rows basically of data we're going to add. So I know from reading the application guidance that I can collect up to 10 different key staff, members that I want to report as part of my application. But within that, maybe I'm only going to provide 3. And so that information is not best collected through a static table, but through this type of table, which is a dynamic table. And so what I can do here is start, entering data dynamically. So right now, there's no data in this overview, this summary table up above. So I'm going to, enter some data here and watch it, roll up into this table. And I can see here, it's also asking me to collect a resume. If I just save this right now, I'm going to get a validation error because it will say, again, it saved part of the data, but it's not allowed me to save this record because an attachment is required for this section. So I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to, I'm just going to throw a document on there for the purposes of letting us save this. Again, you always want to double check to make sure you've got the right document there. And so now when I save this, it's going to be able to tell me, yep, I've put a document there. It's going to allow me to mark it as complete. But again, if I look carefully, this is not the right attachment. So before you would submit this application, you would want to make sure that you've provided John Smith's resume. So drag and drop their resume there. And I can see here that on a dynamic table, it has added a new row for John Smith. It has marked it as complete, and I have gotten a green check mark next to the key staff. Let's say, though, this is a table where I might want to add additional key staff, and so explains this in the AMIS application training manual. But what I need to do to add information is I need to click on Add a Row, and it's going to take me from the record I was just on for John Smith. If I want to navigate back to John Smith and, change a data point, say I had a typo there, he's actually the CEO, and I want to change that. There's that change. I'm still on John Smith. It'll say active because I'm on John Smith. If I want to now edit the new row and enter a new record here for Jane, and she's actually the CFO, and same information is required, and we'll just keep going. And I know that she also needs a resume, so I'm going to just attach another document for the purposes of illustration so that I can save this this file. And once I save it, I see here that I'm going to have this new row is going to change to Jane's name. So Jane Smith, she's the active record. I can see that she's the CFO and that it's marked as complete, which means I've attached her resume and I've completed all the required fields. So this is a quick overview of the different type of table here, which again is it's called a dynamic table. It's going to show me how many additional records I can create. So out of up to 10, I've got 8 remaining rows. I would essentially keep adding rows until I filled in all the information. Let's say I goofed up and I want to delete a record. So down at the very bottom, I have to be on the active record. So again, it'll say active John Smith, and I want to delete John. And I can confirm that, and that's how I'm going to be able to remove records from a dynamic table. One other feature here is I can download a file. So if I want to just see them all at once and see all the data that I have entered as part of completing this particular subsection in this dynamic table, I can download that record and take a look at it as the data comes in, and it's going to open this up. And okay, there I see Jane is still listed, and that's correct because I've deleted John, and so I'm going to close that, and that's how I basically check, the extent of the data that I've provided. So again, I can delete Jane, I can download this CSV file, and I can add as many rows, and it's going to give me a countdown. If I exceed 10 and I've got the wrong information in there, I'll have to delete a record before I'm able to successfully save the subsection. I can see right here that the key staff is no longer has the green check mark. So what I need to do is save this subsection, and it will look, and it'll see here that the record was marked as complete. What's happening though is the subsection is not complete because I've got this empty row that's not completed. And so in order to save the subsection, again, I have to delete the bad data, or I could have, put John back in there, and now when I save it, it'll say with the green check mark, it's going to allow me to save this subsection. And I can move on, and I see here that, again, I'm still making progress towards the goal of completing the application, 20% complete. So that's a quick look at the different types of data tables where we're collecting information, and key sections that are using this dynamic table to collect information. You'll see the application geographic areas. This is the same type of table where I'm going to be entering basically the state where I have active portfolio outstanding as of December 31st, 2018. So that information is collected through a dynamic table, as opposed to beneficiary snapshot entry. So this again is a static table. So these are all predefined. I'm not going to be adding additional rows or because there's a discrete, finite data points that are going to be collected. And so this again is a static table that I'm going to be entering data into. That's a quick look at the different table types that we're using to collect the information from. What I'd like to do now is to transition over maybe to quickly look at, tell you what, in the interest of time, let's move over to another application. And I'm going to move over to another application because we're going to look at the FA objectives and the matching funds requirements before we close up this tutorial. And so I need an application with a little bit more data filled in. And so I'm going to move over here to test organization 17, and I'm going to go to my CDFI and NACA program profile, and down at the bottom underneath applications, I can see that my FA application is already underway. And so I want to look here at a couple of things, and it's going to build on what we just did for test applicant number 8. But again, this has a little bit more data that's pre-populated, that I've already sort of teed up to go through a couple of scenarios that will explain a couple of the other, things that you may encounter when entering data in the application, different validation errors. And these are specific to the FA objectives and the matching funds requirements. So what I'd like to do first is I'm going to basically minimize some sections. By the time you get down to the FA objectives section, you may have, one, if not all of these sections open. So by clicking on the section title, and again, this is the terracotta colored, 9-tile section, I can minimize these sections. And this helps me navigate a little bit easier because I don't have to scroll so much in between. So if I minimize the applicant level information again, it's easier for me to get down here to the introduction to the FA objectives. And a couple of things I need to note before I get into entering data on the FA objectives and even declaring my interest in applying for one of the FA objectives is it warns me in a couple of places that I really need to, one of the places is on the financial data certification. So again, back under the application financial data, I've pre-filled in some of this information just to illustrate a couple of common errors that you may encounter. And you'll see them here, some key fields that are pre-populated with data. I have to have verified that my financial data, is correct, and I do that by clicking this yes, in the certification. And it's really important that I do this before I continue on to my FA objectives. It's going to save me a lot of time to, get this information accurate and correct before I launch into my FA objectives. But I will show us a way of working around a couple of issues that, I may make an error in entering my financial data. And so a couple of service requests have come in on fixing that particular error. And for this part of the tutorial, I would just direct folks to, I guess it begins on page 71 of the AMIS training manual, so 71 of page 186. And really, starting on page 74, I'm going to illustrate this particular error that you may encounter if you do make an error on the financial data inputs. So the application financial data, again, this is the driver for most of the FA objective calculations. The other driver of the FA objective calculations are found on the current financial products and the application geographic areas, as well as the beneficiary snapshot. But all of these sections should be completed chronologically, really, before you get to the introduction to FA objectives. And once you get to the introduction to FA objectives, you'll be asked to do two things. One is to verify that the base FA award amount that you requested is correct. And as a reminder, that's the value that you put in here. So under the financial assistance request, base FA, there's that $1 million. And so I'm going to verify that by selecting yes here. And the other thing I'm going to be asked to verify is the application financial data. So as I navigate here, I'm going to have to answer this affirmatively. And again, if I'm not able to do this, I'm not going to be able to move on to my FA objectives. Basically, this is reattesting to the fact that I've checked my application financial data, because once I click yes to this, it's going to drive a number of calculations that are critical to calculating your FA objective, both the calculations related to your FA objectives and subsequently the calculations related to your performance goals and measures. So that's why we're sort of double checking and triple checking, belts, suspenders, and duct tape checking to make sure that you've confirmed all this data is correct before we move on to the next section. And the next section will be where I am declaring my interest in specific FA objectives. And so the first one I'm going to look at is FA Objective 1.1. And so I answer yes to this because I am interested in the increased volume of financial products FA objective. As a reference point, by now I'm sure folks are probably sick of me referring back to this document, but the Financial Assistance Application Guidance is going to take you through each one of these FA objectives, what it is and how it works. but I just wanted to, again, point this out. This is a way that you navigate through the information that is being collected within the application. So just wanted to give everyone a heads back up on that. And go back to my test group 17. And if I've received a previous award for fiscal year 2017 and 2018, I'll have selected yes to this question. And again, this is going to bring in data that's within AMIS based on my 2017 and or 2018 award to pre-populate the floors, or the starting point, if you will, of determining my FA objective calculation projections for my fiscal year 2019 application. So again, we've done a lot of work this year to make sure that we're bringing in the data to help avoid any avoidable calculation errors. So if you may have accidentally omitted this in the past and it may have caused an error, this year it will be brought in directly into the application. And so if I click yes to these sections and I save it, and I go on to the next subsection under FA Objective 1.1, it's to calculate total financial products closed in eligible and or target markets. And again, I read the very helpful above the line text, and I can see that why this information is being used and really where it's coming from. So I can see that the financial data fields are being collected, and the applicant verified the financial data inputs entered into AMIS on the previous application financial data verification section. So all this is doing is really drawing in the data directly. So I see here $200,044. If I were to navigate back to my application financial data under 2015 for historic year 3, and I'm only showing this for FA Objective 1.1, but a similar process can be done for all the FA objectives, basically some reconnaissance, if you will, on where the information is coming from. So there's the $200,044 closed in loans closed in an eligible market, and so that's the number that is tying directly to this particular FA objective calculation. And so each one of these FA objective calculations will provide you, so I'll just jump over to 1.3. You'll see, there's a similar summary, and this subsection really is just representing the data that is critical to the calculation for any particular FA objective. But what I'm going to show here for FA objective 1.1 is really looking at these two calculations. So there's a floor 1 calculation and there's a floor 2 calculation. I'll start with the floor 1 calculation, and if I follow this calculation, there is my historic total activity products closed in eligible markets. I see it's calculated to be $600,044. My new request is for $1 million, and my projected activity is only $650,000, which brings me to a deficit of $950,000. And I look here, again, the blue text question mark under this pop-up box will explain to me what this calculation is doing. And if I try to save this, I want to point out one thing right now. It will show me that my increased volume calculation is going to cause a validation error. And here's that helpful red text again, and it reads that the total dollar amount to close over the 3-year period of performance is not greater than its cumulative 3-year historic fiscal year of financial products closed plus my FA award request. So in the following subsection, please enter a justification for the absence of the increase. And so you can see here I get a subsection that's entitled No Net Increase in Volume of Financial Products Justification, and this is where I provide that information. If I don't have that validation error, then I don't have to provide this justification. This is really only triggered if that value is less than 0. But I want to show two things related to that. One is that this floor 1 this is not a hard stop. So in other words, this is not going to preclude you from using FA Objective 1.1 if you run into this validation error. Unlike most of the other validation errors, you won't be able to apply. You're basically not eligible. You don't get a justification box. And this particular floor 1 calculation is specific to FA Objective 1.1, where you can provide a rationale and you can still apply under this FA objective, but you are prompted to for additional information, and you're guided through this online help text as well as the application guidance in how to respond to this particular error. What I also want to look at here is this floor 2 calculation, because the floor 2 calculation is based on my previous awards, so total dollar amount of financial products activity that's held to from previous awards, and I mouse over this and I see that to my earlier point, this is pre-populating data that's brought in from my past 2017 and or 2018 awards. So this establishes the floor that is the basis for my additive work that's being proposed under my request for fiscal year 2019 financial assistance. And so these are from my earlier performance goals and measures for increased volume of financial products. I see that that's added, in my base FA request amount. And here's my projection, again, $650,000. And I highlight that number again because I'm going to, hover over the help text here, and I'm going to see once that loads that basically this $650,000, and I pointed it out in the floor 1 calculation. Again, there's $650,000. That seems light to me, and it's almost as if I forgot to complete that section. And so I know that this data is in my application financial data. I know I've verified that information, but something really seems off. That just seems really light because all of my, strategic planning, my business planning has me increasing my activities in eligible and target markets much more than $650,000. So I want to go back to my application financial data and look really at why this may be happening. And so once I load my application financial data and I look here at that particular field, okay, here's that field, the on-balance sheet loans closed in eligible markets and or target markets. I can see, okay, there's my $600,044. Current year is $200,000. Okay, that's projected year 1 is $650. I get to projected periods 2 and 3, and you're right. I totally was probably working too fast, and I forgot to fill in these fields, or maybe I got the projection wrong and it needs to be updated. So I'm just going to update these fields, and I'm going to save it, right? And so what's helpful is the FA objective has directed me back to the appropriate place where this data is being drawn from, and I can see that referenced in my AMIS training manual for financial assistance. And so if I go again under the increased volume, this will show me that particular, particular error and where it's being tied back to and what I need to do. These are the specific fields that are influencing that particular calculation. And so for each FA objective, the AMIS training manual will help guide you through if you're running into any of these validation errors. And for this particular validation error, which is appropriate to the FA objective 1.1, it's the floor 2 calculation. It guided me back to these data fields on the application financial data. And now what's really important, what I'd really like to stress for everyone is just because I've made this change and I've saved now the application financial data input page, and again, I'm going to get errors around the fact that not all the data points are filled out. That's not as concerning to me, or what I want to emphasize is, okay, I've saved those. I go back here and I can confirm that the updates have been made to that particular field, which is right there, on balance sheet loans closed and eligible and or target markets. There's my 650. I added that. And so now my projections are correct, and I know they're correct because they match what my strategic planning business plan documents call for in my projections. And if I just go back now to this particular page, which is where I would have flagged this earlier, here it is. There again, there's the 650 that I had for projected year 1, but you can see I still don't have data from projected period 2 and projected period 3. And subsequently, I'm still going to have these errors, these negatives under floor 2 calculation, and another negative under my floor 1 calculation. And so as it explains in the training manual, in order to update these fields to pull the data really from the application financial data inputs, I need to go back, and what I want to do here is I want to re-verify that the application financial data has been verified. And also, I need to go to the introduction to my FA objective. That's where I've just verified. And you can see here, once I did that, it unchecked my calculate total financial products closed in an eligible market, which means some of the data, and this is beautiful, right? So some of the data that is accessed and pulled in on this subsection has been changed. And so it unchecked. Remember, it used to have the green check mark. It unchecked that because there is now new data being pulled in here. And look at that. That's a beautiful thing. I've got my $650,000 of projected year 2 activity and year 3 activity. And so for this data, again, if I just jumped here over to my floor 2 calculation, or my floor 1 calculation for that matter, I still get a negative number, even though I've updated and validated the application financial data input, and I've validated it here on the introduction to FA objective. The really critical step is on my total financial products closed in an eligible market. Again, I referenced that the green check mark is gone. It's because these two fields, right? These two fields have new data. So I need to save that. And I save this page. And now when I go back to that FA objective, I see here that this page has been, subsection was marked as complete. I get a new green check mark. And again, it has unchecked all of my previous floor calculation validations, which means that there's new data being pulled in there. And look at this. This is fantastic. So I now have a net new increase calculation that's positive. So this is no longer going to cause a validation error. And I can navigate also to my floor 1 calculation. And when I look at that, terrific, positive 2. So this is really good news, and it underscores like a common error that I know we've gotten a couple of service requests on, which is, hey, I noticed that there's an error in my application financial data, and it's causing validation errors in my my FA objective calculations. How do I change the data? And so I've just taken you through the process of updating the underlying source data, which in this case is on the application financial data subsection, and then going through this process of verifying that the application data is correct, and then to the extent to each FA objective calculation, I need to resave this, and I know I need to resave it because there won't be a green check mark there, and that green check mark basically says to me as the applicant or the user, hey, check out this page because there's new data on that page that you want to check and confirm is correct before you go and try and submit or, calculate your eligibility for any one of these FA objectives. And so I walked through this for FA Objective 1.1 only because it has 2 particular errors, validation errors. One of those errors is a hard stop. So if you cannot meet the past FA award and net new increase validation, this floor 2, again, this is based on existing award, so 2017 and or 2018 FA awards, things that you're already held as requirements under an existing assistance agreement. If that validation cannot be overcome based on projections, this is a hard stop. You won't be able to apply using this FA objective unless you fix the validation error. That's a hard stop versus the floor 1, which is if this was negative, I could provide a justification for why, maybe my historic activity was, for whatever reason, it is overestimating or it's underestimating. Whatever the issue is, I'm still able to apply under this FA objective. I just get a new subsection that tells me, it's going to ask me, if this is a negative number, why that's negative, and I'll have to explain the no net growth that merits an increase in the volume according to this sort of guidance text. So all of that, again, explained in greater detail within the FA application guidance document, but really important that everyone understand this process, which is, hey, when I maybe have made an error in my application financial data, I'm going to update that information before I go through and calculate any of my FA objectives. And I might also, notice errors on my beneficiary snapshot or portfolio statistics or my application geographic errors, but really each FA objective is going to guide me through as an applicant where this information is coming from. So, as I go through and I get information, I go through a similar process under each FA objective. So, new development services, again, this is a dynamic table. It's going to, tell me where this data is coming from and how to correct it. But the application itself will do this for each of the FA objectives that I'm interested in applying for. Just another quick note on the FA objectives, and it says this in the guidance document, but in the interest of complete clarity, let's say I'm only going to apply for the FA objective 1.1. I still need to go through each FA objective and according to my eligibility and affirmatively answer whether or not I intend to apply for that FA objective in order for me to be able to attest and to save my application. So if I'm not going to apply, let's say I'm only going to apply under FA Objective 1.1, I need to answer this question or confirm that this FA objective is not relevant to me, you know, for like financial services, FA Objective 1.2. This particular objective isn't even relevant to me because I'm an unregulated institution. And so I still need to open that FA objective. I need to click Save, and I need to confirm that it's saved. There it is, my FA objective. Green check mark, I can continue on. And I need to affirmatively do this for all FA objectives. A couple of questions have come in, folks not seeing this particular screening question. Basically, each of the FA objectives, I have to say yes or no, or I have to confirm that it's not eligible for me to apply under based on my institution type. So that walks us through I'd say the most common question about how our application financial data inputs are linked with the FA objectives, and the fact that to answer the common service request question, you most certainly can change your application financial data inputs at any time. But what I really want folks to understand and to take away and emphasize here is that it's really important to get this information correct at the onset or the outset before you complete FA objectives. And because we know that, you know, there can be errors like the one I just illustrated, I had forgotten to put in a couple of years of projections. There is a process for reconciling those errors and fixing them, but it also necessitates you going through the revalidation and reselection process to make sure that that data that is now entered on this particular line item gets pushed appropriately and propagates through the application. So again, it was this particular field that I was directed towards. I could tell right away that I had made a mistake because they were still 0, and I was able to change those and to revalidate them before continuing on to my FA objectives. And I'd say that is the most common, tricky little nuance that I'd want to, work and fix. If I submitted a service request on this, that would be the response. So just really emphasizing that's the way you work around this particular challenge within the AMIS application, and that holds true for each of the 7 FA objectives. What I'm going to do now is go to this section. Let me just go quickly to the narrative section, financial application narratives. And then again, I'm going to minimize by clicking on the section title so it's a little less scrolling for everyone. So minimize all of these, and I'm going to look here quickly at the financial narrative section just to show, all the questions that are detailed in the financial assistance guidance document, which is back over here. And again, I can navigate there through this very helpful table of contents. I can see there's the financial assistance narrative beginning on page 48. So this walks me through each of the questions that is going to be collected. What I'm going to do here is just open up a little document here with some text that's going to help me show a particular issue that always snags a few applicants up every year, which we hate to see. So I'm just going to call it out and urge caution again, which is within each application, we've got these narrative text boxes, and this is collecting, verbatim the questions that are detailed in the guidance. You see here the different character limits. So each question, depending on its complexity, will have space allocated for different lengths of answers. And so what most folks do is they'll type out their responses in advance, and then they'll sort of work through, and let's just, Control C again and Control V. And as I do that, you can see my character counts will change. And as soon as I exceed whatever the maximum character count is, so here I'm going to, go to this one. It's only 500 characters, my mission statement. If I just Control C and Control V and my answer is longer than what the character length is, it has nothing to do except truncate my response. And so just a word of caution for folks is to ensure that your answers and, different software packages will count, spaces, will count punctuation, will count, character returns differently. So just a heads up of caution when you do, copy and paste from another document. You do really want to check to ensure that it has not truncated your responses. A lot of reviewers will, run into a scenario where, it seems like half of the response is missing, and really there's nothing we can do. So please double check. I won't even be able to put a period on here. Please double check before you continue on to the next subsection that the text is of the appropriate length and is capturing all the information that you want it to capture. And you can see here it's very helpful that it counts down, so I can see, I have 1,300 characters left, and as I copy and paste, I run in and I run out of space. And so I'll be able to save this, but if this was my application narrative, I'm going to be submitting something that seems incomplete, and there's no way to infer from partial responses, and so that reviewers have to work with what they're given as part of the application. And unfortunately, again, every year we'll get a few applications that come in with these types of issues on their narrative responses. But I did want to just call that out. Again, we're able to save these subsections, but we can't verify that the complete narrative has been provided, and so that's something to pay attention to before you submit your application. Two other things to go through here before we wrap up for the day, maybe three, maybe four. We're on a roll here. So let's go to the supplemental application subsection. So unlike years past, what we're doing is this year is that, we have other supplemental applications that are basically part of the same funding application, and the funding application that we're working in right now is the base FA application. We know that for the base FA application, there are 3 supplemental applications that are associated with this. We know this from the notice of funding available. So we have the Persistent Poverty County FA application, we have the Disability Funds Financial Assistance application, and we have the Healthy Foods Finance Initiative Financial Assistance application. And each one of those will be accessed underneath the Supplemental FA application section. And I will have to answer affirmatively yes or no to each one of these questions. And it will trigger whether or not I fill out that particular subsection of additional information that's pertinent only for these supplemental applications. And again, details of these supplemental applications can be accessed again on our website. So here's Persistent Poverty, Disability Funds. The Healthy Foods Finance Initiative, if you are interested in applying for that, that application is not published yet, so there's no information on that particular funding program as of yet, but I will note, I'm just going to answer yes to this because I want to point this out for folks that are interested in applying for HFFI. What we do need to collect from you is your interest basically in applying for HFFI, and then we're going to follow up at a later date with the application materials. And so you can see here the disclaimer language is, you know, if you are interested in applying for HFFI this year, you do need to put in an amount so that we can follow up with you once those materials are available. So you need to put in a requested amount, and you need to put in the first payment amount. And once you do that, you have indicated to the CDFI fund that you are interested in applying for the Healthy Foods Financing Initiative. And as it says here, we're going to, you know, follow up as that information is available. But if you do not include this, we don't have any idea that we need to follow up with you. So if you do wish to apply for that program, make sure that you fill out that award request. For persistent poverty, I'll just show this, and the disability funds has a bit longer application. Again, it's all detailed in the application guidance and the very detailed AMIS training manual. But what I want to show here is for persistent poverty, again, the eligibility requirements and the goals of this program further explained in the application guidance. But just like how we showed back on the FA objective subsection, if I go back to FA objective 1.1, inside of here, what we've done this year as a you know, resource, point of information for everyone, we wanted to be really clear for folks what it is you're committing to. So if you are funded, these are the performance goals and measures for each FA objective. And I realized that I didn't show this when I walked through the FA objective 1.1. So I do want to emphasize that these performance goals and measures that are tied back to your projected, you know, for this FA objective, it's 1.1. It's the total dollar amount of projected financial products over the 3 years of performance. So again, it's that 1.95 million number. And per the assistance agreement, you know, here are the benchmarks. And so if you're successful in applying under this FA objective, these are the exact same performance goals and measures, or PG&Ms, that will appear in your assistance agreement. And we went through and put these in this year as an enhancement to the application so that, you know, before you hit submit, you really want to be comfortable with these final PG&Ms. As it says, you know, these are subject to change to comply with CDFI fund policies and floor calculations, but really this is designed to help you as an applicant assess the reasonableness of these projections if you are to meet this FA objective and to receive an award. Really, these are the PG&Ms that you'll be held accountable to for each of the 3 years in the period of performance. So just like that, so that was for 1.1, you'll see that same calculation, you know, basically for all of these FA objectives that you may or may not be applying for. But for this purpose, I wanted to show too that this same logic holds true for the persistent poverty county application as well as the disability fund application. So as you fill these out, you're going to see these performance PG&Ms, performance goals, and benchmarks calculated again in the interest of complete transparency, so you know exactly what you're committing to do should you receive an award, in this case a PPC award. And you know, this is just a pretty simple calculation, and you can see how it's working. But you are basically committing to doing this volume of activity in persistent poverty counties. with the use of your persistent poverty proceeds. So in year one, you would be expected to meet the 5% or $15,000 of activity, $150,000 by year two, and the year three benchmark of $300,000. And in order to, again, save this subsection and ultimately submit your application, you need to have, attested and consented to this. And so there's this disclaimer. You have to select this box that you're aware that what you're signing will show up in your assistance agreement, and you will be held accountable should you receive an award. So once I save this, it's going to tell me that that subsection is complete. That's terrific. And I would need to do the same thing for, the disability fund. So if I, were to fill out a disability fund application, which is a little bit more data, so I'm not going to go into it for the purposes of this tutorial, but you'll see I've got, additional subsections that I have to complete if I'm interested in filling out the disability fund application. And so in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. I'll just go back and select no to the disability fund application. And that brings me all the way up to the next, sort of the second to last section that we wanted to cover. Again, not going section by section. Obviously, there's a lot of information here. But what we do want to focus on for core applicants, and again, if you're a native CDFI applying under the native financial assistance program, or if you're a small and emerging CDFI and you're applying under the SECA eligibility, you won't even see this subsection. But for the benefit of our friends in the core applicant category, I just want to quickly move through how we are collecting matching funds this year because it's distinct from last year. So the first rule is you have to identify again your financial institution category because sources of matching funds vary by your financial institution category type. So I'm an unregulated CDFI. I know that I need to save that. I know that from the next subsection, it's going to ask me to validate this again and to confirm. And this all is in the interest of helping me eliminate any errors that, in years past I may have made errors, a lot of them, in selecting, sources of matching funds that I'm not even eligible to use based on my institution type. So, I'm not a credit union, so I wouldn't be providing credit union shares as an eligible source of matching funds. But here in this list, I may have grants that I want to use as matching funds. And again, as a core applicant, I'm going to say yes to these. If I'm a SECA, small and emerging, or if I'm a native CDFI, I don't even see this subsection, so I don't even have to worry about this. But I'm going to click Save here, and I'm going to go on to the next component of matching funds, and this is for retained earnings. So if I'm reporting retained earnings as a source of matching funds, let me just select yes. This is the one sort of anomaly, if you will, of matching funds types, in that here under the type of matching funds detail, I'm selecting basically my type of matching funds. You can see here I've got one record, pre-populated, and these vary whether or not my source is in hand or committed. So again, I'm an unregulated institution. I'm only going to see the types that are applicable for me. I hover over here and I'm told to use the pick list. So I'm going to use these to identify the source of my matching funds, the type, and whether or not it's in hand or committed, as well as the amount. I'm going to provide all of the required information that's denoted by the red asterisk, and I'm going to save these as part of my application. And I see here, I've selected that I've got 100,000 in grant funds from this provider A, and if I just click through here, I'm going to go to the matching funds detail for retained earnings. So retained earnings is the only source of matching funds that I am still collecting as part of an external workbook. All the rest of the retained earnings are now collected exclusively within AMIS on this matching funds detail page. And so I would add additional matching funds records for each type of matching funds that I wanted to report, and I would select whether or not it's in hand or committed. With the exception of the matching funds for retained earnings, and this is only because the retained earnings calculator is, there's a number of calculations that are being run sort of behind the scenes, offline, that can only be, calculated efficiently within an Excel workbook. And so I know that the Excel workbook is going to be accessible here under my my resources for this funding round. So I'm going to just pull open this retained earnings calculator, and again, I will complete this retained earnings calculator based on my institution type. So I need to enable the content, and let's say I'm a bank holding company, and here's my retained earnings calculator for a bank. Basically, I follow the retained earnings instructions, and the number that I get down here for the matching funds used, and again, this is explained in my my financial assistance. If I go back here, the matching funds guidance will walk me through this whole process, but I'm basically trying to demonstrate the link between where the application is collecting this data and what needs to be uploaded. So only for retained earnings do I need to, will I have answered really affirmatively to this question, which is select matching funds retained earnings. If I click no here, I don't see that subsection, but I have determined that I'm going to use retained earnings. I need to enter that information, so retained earnings from the workbook. So let me just, for the purposes of illustration, enter an amount. Let's say I had $100,000 in retained earnings from last year. I would upload the workbook and save this record. And again, I guess I've not attached the workbook, so in the interest of time, let me just, attach, or why don't I save this retained earnings calculator and quickly attach it to this application very quickly. So I'm just going to put it in here and save it. And as I go back, perfect, there it is. I'm going to drag and drop it over this area. There it shows up in as attachment, and I'm going to save it. Now this is, again, it's really important. If this is my only source of matching funds, I need to confirm that this is the correct retained earnings calculator, because unlike in years past, this really what you provide at the point of application is what we're using as part of the review process. And again, we'd hate to have, not sufficient retained earnings or not sufficient sources of match come into play as part of the review process, because again, we're unable to go back and forth once you attest and submit your application this year. It's really locked down. So please, please, please use extra care in filling out all this information. And I'm going to show folks how to, I've shown you how to confirm that you've attached the correct document here, but I want to look quickly at the matching funds summary table. So this is collecting all the data that I've input in my matching fund sources. So again, the matching funds detail and the matching funds detail for retained earnings. I put in one source of a grant, which was in hand for $100,000, and I put in another $100,000, which was retained earnings. There it is, retained earnings. So that's up there, $100,000. So together I have $200,000 of matching funds. Let me go quickly here to the matching funds calculator to show you what you really should and what you actually need to validate before submitting your application. And again, this is all in the interest of eliminating any of the potential errors for, say, bad data, right? So I see that I've only got, I guess, $200,000, $100,000 in matching funds here, and I am requesting $1.3 million. So here's my base FA amount. I also had a persistent poverty amount of $300,000, but I only have $100,000 in matching funds showing up. It's because I haven't saved this, so I need to save this in order for the retained earnings to come through. And so I save that. And now if I go back to my matching funds calculator, there I'm a little bit closer to my goal. See, it now pulled in $200,000 of matching funds. But I look here, and if I just save this right now, and I see, oh darn, look at that. I'm only 15% towards my goal, and it says in-hand and committed matching funds at the time of application must be greater than or equal to 50% of my total FA request amount. So I see here that I have a $1.3 million in total FA request amount, and it's because I have insufficient matching funds. So this, again, we've tried to make this as user-friendly for everyone as possible, for all applicants who are validating their data before you're able to submit. We really wanted to work hard to make sure that all of the eligible financing that's available is validated, and that you're able to apply for these. And in years past, you would have been able to submit an application maybe without even knowing that, oh my goodness, I just forgot a source of matching funds, and I have insufficient matching funds. So this year, instead of being able to do that, we have created this particular page, which is limiting your ability to submit. Basically, I can't submit an application right now because this section is not validated. And so what I would need to do is I could either reduce my FA request amount, but that's not really right. I mean, I would have figured out I had insufficient matching funds at the onset, and at this point, I'm not going to reduce my FA request amount. I could, eliminate my PPC request amount. Why don't I just go ahead and do that, so I can show, that my supplemental application, maybe, I was requesting $300,000. Given that, my matching funds are so deficient at this point, I can, change that, and I can just go back, and I can, go back and say that I'm not going to save and request PPC funds. And if I go back to my matching funds calculator, that's great. It took out that $300,000. So now I'm at 20%. So I'm still, $300,000 shy of being able to request $1 million in base FA. And at that point, I realized, I forgot a source of matching funds. So I want to go back to my matching funds detail page. And again, this is a dynamic table. So I know from my earlier discussion about dynamic tables, I can just add another row here, and I'll follow the on-screen prompts to add another record number for this new row, which is my active new row. And this will be, provider B. And this will, let's just say, it is, let's, make it another grant. Let's just say it's committed, though. So it's a new grant. Maybe I was, filling this out earlier, and I've just got a new grant commitment that I just came right in time, right before I submitted my application. So, and wouldn't you know, it was $300,000, and so I'm going to leverage that money that I've got a new capital, grant commitment from a new provider, and it came just in time because I told them I wanted to apply for a $1 million FA grant, and that I needed at least 50% in hand or committed at the point of application. I'm going to say, that I have contact information. I'm going to put in, the email, and I'm going to, make sure that it's in the eligible window. So I don't expect to get this until maybe, September of this year, and it's maybe all going to come, by the end of December. And I know that it's, pegged towards an eligible FA activity. I could describe more information. Really important here, though, what I want everyone to take away, I have to attest and validate each one of my sources of matching funds for it to save. So I'm doing my attestation and validation for it being a non-federal source, and that I can provide documentation of it upon request. And I will be able to save this. And I know that I entered $300,000. And if I wanted to check this again, I can download a CSV file. So let me look at that really quick. And I see here that it has brought in that information to this table. And I see that, okay, it's matching funds in-hand grant amount and committed amount. So I've now got, 400,000 of sources, plus I had my retained earnings. So if I go back to my matching funds calculator now, and I go back to my summary table, I need to, again, save this in order to push the data through. So there's my new 300,000 grant commitment. Once I save that, I see now 500,000, and I go back to my matching funds calculator. The green check mark is off, which is good news. Hey, check that out. That's beautiful. Okay, I've got my $500,000 in commitments, matching in hand or committed at the time of application, which is at least 50% of my requested $1 million base FA request amount. And so now when I save this particular record, success, that's a beautiful thing. That means I'm able to save all of my matching funds section. I've validated it, and I know that at least 50% of my request will be is matched at the time of application. And so this was really an effort on our part to make sure that, unlike in years past, folks may have not included all of the matching funds required for the amount that they were requesting. This year, just like in a number of other validations, the validations I showed around the FA objectives, the validations I showed around the application, financial data, all of the validations that are built in are really to help mitigate against the risk of filling out any part of the application in a way that's, not consistent with the guidance. That said, folks are responsible for all the information that's in their application. So all of the, guidance materials, you should really exercise caution in making sure that the information that you're submitting and attesting to is accurate. We've put in these validations to be as helpful as possible. That said, you are ultimately responsible for all that data, and that's essentially what an authorized rep for the organization will be attesting to at this point. So this is the very last screen. Sort of the last step is to attest, and once you click attest, and if this were 100% complete, you would be able to submit your application. If you try to submit your application and there's still sections that are incomplete, you're going to get an error message. And why don't I just do that? You'll get this warning that you can no longer edit the application. Are you sure you'd like to submit it? At this point, if I didn't have any errors, and I have quite a few because, again, I didn't go through section by section. It was the intent of this demo was to just show some of the common issues that might crop up, some basic features, and how to, reconcile any errors, common errors that you might get. So I'm not able to actually submit my application because I have all of these validation errors that would need to be corrected. Just to note, if I do correct all of these validation errors, I'll get 100% complete, and that's when I'll be able to attest and submit my application. And at that point, again, it's all locked down. So we've provided these, validations and these guidance documents to be as helpful as possible. But ultimately, each applicant is responsible for the data that they're putting in the application. So please be mindful, especially mindful of all of the responses and all of the validations as part of your submission. That said, the matching funds calculator is especially helpful this year of making sure that you have listed all of the sources of your matching funds before you actually hit the submit button. And then back to the beginning, folks may recall I was showing this view PDF option. So this is a good place to check and triple check. As I was just sharing, you're ultimately responsible for all the data within your application. Before you submit your application, we'd encourage everyone to look at this PDF. You can see here that, now the data that I filled in is going to show up here. So remember those 650s, those projections that I had populated for the purposes of that particular FA objective, 1.1. We'll see, as we scroll through here, some of the other pages that were completed as part of the application, polling now data. So in the application, once this says 100% complete, suggestion for folks is to run this PDF to view it and just to confirm all the data. Some folks find this a little bit more accessible or user-friendly to verify that the information that they're providing is accurate before they hit the submit button. Let me just look down at my notes and see if there's anything else that we wanted to cover for folks. Appreciate everyone's patience in going through this. We're going to timestamp all of this material so that, if there was something maybe I covered under the FA Objective 1.1 section, once this is posted on YouTube, you won't have to rewatch this entire video to try and pick out where that section is. We'll have a timestamp so that you can more easily navigate to that section of the video. Just to jump back here to the important dates, again, we've got this timeline. Again, pay special attention to the time that's left as you go through your application, on all these questions, the remaining time. Best way to get a hold of us with any questions, highly encourage people to submit a service request if you have questions about anything, absolutely anything about the application, from FA objective questions, policy questions, data point questions, or any, issues that you might encounter with the AMIS template itself not working the way that you would expect it to work. The best way to get a hold of us is through the service request feature. That's part of your AMIS account, within the organization here. You'll have a service request to go through the service request process. And what I'd like to do now is just double check. It looks like, we've taken a really quick tour through the new AMIS application. This will conclude our How to Navigate the 2019 Financial Assistance Application demo. Thank everyone for your interest in the 2019 Financial Assistance Program. As mentioned, best way to contact us is through the service request system. For the CDFI and Native Initiatives Program team, we'll answer your questions, or the AMIS help desk to deal with any technical issues on the AMIS application itself. And as I navigate back to our homepage here, or the default landing page for application-related detail, again, the timeline, key dates coming up are June 4th, the last day that CDFI Fund will be able to answer questions about the application, with the application due June 6th. Again, all of the webinars and training materials posted, and finally the financial assistance application resources. So there's a lot more detail for folks to get into as pertinent to your specific application as you go through your effort to complete and successfully submit an application. And thank you so much for your interest in the CDFI Fund's Financial Assistance Program for the fiscal year 2019. This will conclude today's recording.